For the hills in order stood, or earth received her frame.
Shibby-dibby-dibby-dibby-dibby-dibby-dibby-boom, boom. 76 subscribers. 309 videos. Not bad. All right.
All right, which camera am I looking at? That one? Welcome everybody to live Q&A. This is Pastor and the Recovering Heretic. I am Pastor Dave.
I am the Recovering Heretic, Dan.
This is our live Q&A show. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
I was on vacation last week. We didn't do this.
No, we did not. So hopefully there's not a lot of rust to get out.
Yeah, even if there is. Rust is fine.
But I liked what we did the last couple times, going around, finally having the excuse to figure out what all this stuff, all the trappings are about.
Right, what all this stuff is. Yes.
So today we're kind of getting back to normal,
Okay.
but only kind of.
Okay.
It's another big theological question,
Okay.
but it is based on the readings. That's what got me going on it.
Yeah.
Because our first reading today from 1 Kings,
It's my favorite reading.
we have such a bloodthirsty, violent God here.
Oh, it's awesome.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, I mean, I could see it as a Hollywood blockbuster great, but
Oh, it's great.
how do you have, and so this is the overall question. We'll get into minutia in a minute. But the overall question is, how do you reconcile the two major different gods that we have in the Bible? And as you and I were talking about earlier, really it's even more. It's like there are like 4 or 5 very distinctly different versions of God in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so, but the biggest bifurcation, the biggest chasm, is looking at the God of love that Jesus talks about, which is just this unconditional being of love. The Gospel of John. I mean, you cannot read the Gospel of John and see any relationship between this God that is just pure.
Let's be careful
love.
here. We don't want to slip into actual heresy.
Okay,
So
okay.
Let's be careful here.
But I'm going to set it up
Yeah.
because these are questions people have.
Right.
And then this God that we see in Kings, 1 Kings today, and we see in, with Moses, the whole, and Joshua as they're coming into Israel finally, and the instructions from God are, you wipe out everybody. I want total and complete genocide of anybody who's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how do you reconcile those two gods? How do you, what I've been calling rage God versus love God?
Where do you? Well, so let's start with the specifics of the King story, and we can work our way up from there. So it's helpful to know the context of the King story. So in this arc of Kings, Elijah has King Ahab and Queen Jezebel, or king and queen in Israel. And they are like the epitome of bad kings.
Okay.
They are Ahab and Jezebel.
And is this the Jezebel?
This is the Jezebel, right?
Okay.
So they are bad kings, they are greedy, they are bloodthirsty, they are oppressive, they are not worshiping the one true God. Jezebel is actively encouraging Baal worship, which is a Canaanite god. They are really bad, and so Elijah, up to this point, has been tussling back and forth with Ahab and Jezebel in this kind of contest over who's the one true God. And at this point in the story, what's happened in the 9 verses before our story picks up, the chapter opens up with Jezebel basically issuing a death threat to Elijah, right? I'm going to kill you, and so.
And this is not idle. I mean,
this is not an idle threat like on Jezebel's. This is like, I'm actively going to kill you, and so Elijah becomes very depressed because the story before this, he had actually just defeated in religious combat all the prophets of Baal. Is
that the one up at the mountain?
The mountain and the fire. And so, despite the fact that he's just had all of Israel witness, the defeat of Baal, it doesn't seem to make a one difference, right? And so he's in this very despairing situation. And Jezebel issues this death threat, and so Elijah goes to Mount Horeb, which is another name for Sinai.
Okay.
And he goes to the cave, like there's only one cave on Mount Sinai. This is the cave where Moses saw the burning bush.
Okay.
Right? You
So
know, yeah, it's like
we're in the central theater here.
right. You are like back at the holiest spaces, right? This is like where the whole shebang got started. And Elijah's complaint is that he's alone. You know, that's his major complaint. I am the only faithful Israelite left, is Elijah's complaint.
And Elijah, I mean, he also has kind of a history of getting depressed about this stuff, too.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right. He has a history of this, right?
And is this the same Elijah that had sent the bear to the kids?
That's Elisha, that's his
okay,
successor.
okay.
And so his complaint is he's alone. And so God's response to him after doing the whole still small voice and the firestorm and all that stuff, which is wonderfully poetic. But God's response is, go back, right? Go back to Israel. Then he gives them 3 instructions. He says, you're to anoint Jehu as king over Israel. You're to anoint, or 2 instructions. You're to anoint Jehu and you're to anoint Elisha in your place as your successor.
Well, there was a third. There was...
Yeah, whoever's king of Judah.
Aram.
Yeah. Oh, king in Damascus. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So you're to anoint what's his name as king of Damascus. Right. And it sounds bloodthirsty, but the actual point is right. So if you're anointing another king, Ahab and Jezebel are still alive. Right. So what God is saying is, I'm initiating a coup. Right.
Yeah.
Against the people who are causing you problems, right? And then God has this line where he says, we could kill all your enemies, you know, like any part of the Jezebel regime is going to be killed by Aram, you know, whoever escapes Aram is going to be killed in Jehu's coup, you know, so don't worry about them. And even if anybody who's left over is going to be dealt with by your successor, you know, so all the people causing you problems are going to be dealt with. And then God says, and yet, after all that's said and done, there are still 7,000 faithful Israelites that you don't even know about. You know, and so it's not really bloodthirsty. It's this line of, I'm going to overthrow the powers that be. And even after I'm done overthrowing the powers that be and we conduct all the purges that are necessary, you are not actually alone. Does that make sense?
It makes sense from the standpoint of appeasing Elisha.
Well, right, but that's the correct standpoint, right? This is part of it, right? The Bible has the Bible's not postmodern. It's not a postmodern narrative. So the Bible firmly believes there's a correct viewpoint, and there's a wrong viewpoint. You know, there's a chosen viewpoint, and then there's a not chosen viewpoint. And
but how then do you reconcile that? Go up to, again, like the theology John has.
Well, but that's true too, even in John, right? You know, I mean, there are. Well, let's say that for a second. So what I'm talking about with Elijah is that a couple points. One, God works in history, right? Which is just objectively true the whole Bible through. 2, God's engaged in this work of overthrowing the powers that be, you know, which is also a central theme in the New Testament. Right, you know, this is Mary. This is the Magnificat, right? He has cast the mighty down from their thrones, sings Mary. You know, and then Christians get themselves all tied up into knots because they forget that casting the mighty down from their thrones is actually a messy process. You know, that getting rid of the Ahabs of the world is not. Let's talk to them nicely. You know, and so.
Yeah, I guess in some ways you can see that with Ukraine now.
Right, exactly. Right, you know, I mean, just. Casting the mighty down from their thrones is not all rainbows and fuzzy teddy bears, you know. And so this gets to a point about God, but God is angry sometimes because he is loving, not, you know, they're not in contrast. They actually need each other, right? And
this kind of sounds like the whole "this hurts me more than you" parental argument.
No, it's not that at all. It's if God is a God who is for the poor and for the weak, and stands against those who are oppressing the weak, I would hope he'd be angry right? He needs to be angry. Wrath is a necessary component of God because it's the wrath that deals with sin. The Bible's position is never, I'm all right, you're all right, everybody's okay. It's always, God's position is always, I love you, but I'm going to do something about this mess that y'all have found yourselves in and largely created
on your own.
On your own, right? Yeah. Like, I'm going to do something about that. And in fact, I'm quite irritable about the mess. Now that doesn't mean I'm going to kill all of you, but it does mean there is this component to God which you need that wrathful side, or else you need that righteous anger. Because if there's no righteous anger, then the actual issue of evil doesn't get dealt with. Does that make sense?
It does, but I still have a conundrum, and we got, Steve. We have a couple people online, and I'm hoping they chime in more on this. So I know it's not just me. Yeah. Or maybe it is just me, and they just have to face that. Steve makes the point that again sounds like a father. Sometimes you just lay down the law.
Well, right, but in a father's case, right, you need discipline, right? Like love without discipline isn't love. It's just gratuitous giving, there needs to be law, right? Grace without law just ends up justifying the sin. Yeah. Would be the Lutheran way of thinking about that.
But you made the comment of you don't need to wipe everybody out. In this particular case, there's still 7,000 believing people. But harken back to like the big famous one of the story of Noah. Which, and I know we've talked about that before, an earlier mythology that it comes out of. But if you take it at surface value and assume that it's literally true, that's everybody. It's rebuilding. We have a new Adam and Eve, basically, out of Noah's family. Yeah. Everybody else is being wiped out.
The only one I would say to that is it's not going to happen again. And that's all you got to say.
Yeah, but I think that's still kind of avoiding that issue of this. There's this God that wiped everyone out. Yeah. And that's going beyond love with discipline.
Wrath is a necessary component to God. It makes us uncomfortable, but it is a necessary component to who God is. Or else he becomes a wishing stone and a magic genie, not a true God. It is out of wrath it is just as much out of wrath as grace. Because I don't want to separate wrath from love. I think they're the same. It's all love. But it's just as much out of wrath as mercy that sin gets dealt with. That sin gets wrestled with. And so you need both components. It's like that. There's that. So plug for our other media venture, our podcast,
Church in Space.
In 3D. In 3D, out now. There's that Star Trek episode where Kirk's anger gets separated. Do you remember this? He has a transporter accident where his anger gets separated from his mercy or whatever.
Yeah, his dark side versus his light side.
Right, and it's very clearly it's his anger versus his, and what you figured out is you need both for it to be Kirk.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with God. You need both for it to be God. Where this makes us uncomfortable is we're kind of like, well, what if the wrath is directed at us? And it's like, well, yeah.
That's part of the point.
Yeah, that's part of the point. It should make us a little uncomfortable, Well,
what about the big question then why would there be punishment after death? Why would there be a hell if we're going to have the wrath now?
Well,
it's like I'm sending you to your room. Yeah. You're punished. Then you emerge. And then a year later, I'm punishing you again for what I punished you for a year ago. Yeah. Why have the wrath now and then again still have a hell afterward?
Different traditions have different understandings of this. So I'll just give you. This is Lutheran. If you're not Lutheran, sorry.
Follow your thing.
Follow your thing. The Lutheran perspective has always been hell is not about punishing you, but about you have chosen. You choose hell, not God. God's choice for you is eternal grace. But you can choose to chuck that gift in the trash if you want to. And so hell is a choice you make for yourself. It's not a choice. It's not a choice God doesn't send you. You choose to go there yourself. It's basically the basic principle.
Yeah.
For a Lutheran.
So, I would like that better. That billboard that's on I-70 that is nationally famous
Right.
for saying hell is real.
Hell is real.
I would prefer the hell is a choice.
Right. Well, and it is, right? And so
I think that's more meaningful.
Yeah, hell may be real, but grace is like a Christmas gift. And you don't choose to receive a Christmas gift, right? You're going to get it kind of regardless whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
But you can choose to chuck it in the trash after you leave, And so Lutherans kind of famously, one of my professors used to say, we don't believe in free will, we believe in free won't.
Yeah.
You can't say yes to God, but you can say no, and then so Lutherans have typically believed that when it comes to hell, we have chosen to chuck that gift of grace that we all receive in the trash, and move on.
Or snubbing.
Yeah.
How can we not say yes?
Well, because your will is so bound up in, this is where we get confused on this topic. As Lutherans, there's a difference between choice and will,
okay,
and so you have choices that you make, right? But your will is so messed up that given the freedom to act, it will always choose the wrong one. And that's true for all of us, right?
Yeah.
I use addiction as my metaphor for this one, right? I am former pack and a half a day smoker. I can tell you, I want a cigarette every day of my life.
See, even still.
Right, even still. I could go back to smoking a pack and a half of cigarettes right now.
Yeah.
And that's what separates me from social smokers who only smoke at parties and stuff. I don't know how they do what they do because I want one right now. And were I to have one, I would just,
relapse, basically.
I would just relapse. I would go back into it really easily, right?
So it's a true addiction.
Yeah, it's a true addiction for me, right? And I have no choice about that. My will is totally bound to that addiction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's no free will there. There's no power to say yes to be not a smoker.
How then do you make the choice?
Well,
what's driving you to make the choice?
Well, every day you kind of wake up and you go, well, I am a smoker, but I'm not going to have one today. And that is admitting, kind of like the Alcoholics Anonymous thing, I am powerless. This is step one of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I am powerless. I actually am. But today I'm not going to make this decision, And that's kind of how grace works. It's admitting I don't actually have any power. I need saving here, and then like Peter in our story today, right? Mm-hmm. Lord, save me. I'm a mess.
Yeah.
I admit I can't actually walk on water.
and that's the answer. I know this is a bit of a tangent from where we're going, and maybe it does tie in still, but in the reading, that famous reading of Jesus walking on the water, and Peter pops out and takes a stroll with him. Mm-hmm. And I never caught this before. Mm-hmm. It's not the walking on the water that scares him, and it's not the awareness of walking on water. The passage says
no,
it's the wind.
It's the wind and the waves. Yeah.
So that strikes me as interesting. What does that mean? Because you would think that popular conception that he realizes he's walking on water and that's when it makes him sink.
Yeah.
Is not the case. What they're very careful about saying in the gospel is it's the wind.
Yeah, well,
that shakes him out.
He grows frightened, right? You know, and that's his.
But wouldn't he have been frightened just like, oh my gosh, I'm walking on water?
I kind of. Okay, I think about this as like a Looney Tunes scene, when like, You know, when like Wile E. Coyote runs off the cliff and he's still running in the
Yeah, he
air
hovers
for
for a while.
and then he's like, and that's how I kind of see this scene. You know, I think Peter's literally a jump first, ask questions later kind of guy. You know, and so I think it's perfectly reasonable to me that he gets out there and he's thinking it's fine, and then he's like, "Whoa, there's waves here," like, you know, like. Just
that wind could blow me over, then what?
Yeah, then what? Like, will only my feet be up in the air? You know, like, what are the physics here? Like, you know, and then you grow afraid.
And the cartoon thing kind of fits again in that, you know, if you suddenly stopped having that ability, it'd be like a not dive. You're instantly down in the water.
Right.
But the way it's described, there's plenty of time for him to have the realization, like Wile E. Coyote,
right.
Look around, and he's still levitating.
Yeah.
And then very slowly starts to drop. So
Right.
Jesus has plenty of time to say, I got you.
Right.
Now, if there's a big Acme stenciled on the boat, then we know for sure.
Right, then it's a lunatic. Right. The gospel according to Chuck Jones.
Which I could get into.
Yeah.
Does that relate then to the will? How does that relate to the free will, back to wrath and choice with God?
Well, I mean, so Peter's always a great example. Peter's decisions are always, his choices, left to himself, Peter's choices are always wrong.
Yeah,
You know?
over and over and over.
Right? Like, I mean, he keeps...
Again, I can see why people are surprised that he gets to be the first pope.
Right,
You know?
yeah. I mean, his choices are always a disaster, you know, left to his own devices, right? You know, and to do what he freely wills, you know, it's things like then he gets out of the boat, or then Jesus calls him Satan, or, you know, then he denies Jesus, right? And, and he gets these...
There are probably little things we don't know about.
There's
Like
probably
he gets the coffee order wrong.
Right, probably left to his own devices, he's a disaster.
Yeah.
But the Holy Spirit working in him, which is not his choice, you know, he's the guy who gets up on, you know, the Holy Spirit descending on him and, you know, doing all these miraculous things and working in him gives him then this power to be the guy who gives the sermon on Pentecost and the guy who preaches at the Sanhedrin and, you know, and the guy who goes to Rome and the guy who eventually says, I'm going to stay here even though they're hunting Christians, you know, and
crucify me upside down.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and that I am the rock, you know, and Jesus even says the one thing Jesus gets right, Peter gets right when he says, Jesus, you're the Son of God, the Messiah. You know, Jesus says, yeah. And
finally,
that's been
get a gold star on that one.
Well, and he says that's been revealed to you. You didn't come up with that on your own, you know.
Well, then on that note, and again, back to choice and free will, right? This almost sounds like Peter didn't have a choice. The way you describe it is that the Spirit comes in and it's almost like a parasite. It takes him over.
But again, he doesn't have a choice to say yes, right? And this is true of all of us. So the good that we do is not, this is Paul's point in Romans, the good that we do is not of us. You know, it's the Spirit working in us. You know, I have these moments maybe I'm the only one, but I have these moments all the time where I'll do something and it's like, and I'll be like, man, that wasn't me. Like, I'm a jerk. Why would I do that? You know, like in a good way. Like, I'll do something really nice. And I'll be like, that's not me. I'm an ass. Like, you know, like, why would I do that? And that's the Holy Spirit working in us to change us into who God is going to make us, that new creation that God is making us into.
Yeah.
You know, and so in a certain sense, he didn't, you know, I don't think he has much of a choice on Pentecost to get out and give that sermon. You know, he's going to give it, right? And he didn't have a choice that the Spirit descended on him. And, you know, so I think, and the stories they tell about Peter at the end of his life, it doesn't seem like he has much of a choice going back into Rome, you know, and so I think it makes us a little uncomfortable, but we have far less power over our choices than we like to imagine, you know, and science is even kind of saying this, right? The more you read about brain biochemistry, the more the neuroscientists say, you know, that choice was predetermined by some chemical in your brain that you received when you were, an infant, you know, and
Yeah, I've seen estimates as high as 98%. That
Right.
98% of what you think
is your
your
choice.
free will and choice is actually programmed.
Is actually
into you.
programmed in some way, right? You
Yeah.
know, and so even science is telling us this basic truth, which is, yeah, we have choices, but
Only 2%.
well, and maybe even that, like our again, getting back to the difference between choice and will. You know, we have choices, but our will isn't, you know, so determinative as we think it is.
So let's take that, and coincidentally, it brings us back full circle then, because based on that, and based on even physicists feel that some physicists are saying 100% of
Right.
our
Yeah.
what we do is pre-programmed.
It's all by the atoms of the universe.
Yes,
Yeah.
neurologists are giving us a little
Yeah.
leeway with a 2% free will.
Yeah.
But given that, why would we bother to have a punitive criminal justice system instead of a reforming criminal justice system? If so much is pre-programmed in us, it seems crazy to convict someone to a lifetime in prison for something that ultimately was programmed into them, that they didn't
Yeah.
have that choice for. And bringing it to our theologic version, then what good is that wrath from God if all that's pre-programmed in us anyway? How can
Well-
God change us via wrath?
Well, he doesn't change us just via wrath, but the wrath is a component that motivates the change, I guess I would say. You know, there are, well, the question is what and why is programmed into us, right? You know, like, it's not just the Holy Spirit, but sin is also at work in us, right? You know, and so we are, part of our programming is this incredibly flawed programming that, you know, the Bible describes as going all the way back to Adam and Eve. You know, there's this stem root programming error
Yeah.
in the operating system.
So
You-
why did God release us in beta form? Why didn't he wait till we had the...
That one is you're going to have to ask the Almighty on that one. You know, the simplest answer that everybody has come to in all of Christian history is that God deemed before the foundations of the world that this alternative was better than the others. You know, that God looked at the universe and said, it is worth it.
This one's at least operational.
Well, not even just this one's at least operational, but this is good and whole and loving and worthy of my love, and I will love it even with the flaws that come with beta form, right? You know, and that was better than all other alternatives. You know, it's kind of been the Christian, you know, God knew all the parallel, you know, doing the Doctor Strange thing.
Yeah.
I've seen 1,876, you know, possible futures, and this one is the best one. You know, despite all the mess that's obviously there.
Yeah.
You know, but that also means getting back to the wrath, and this is what like Apocalypse is about, is that final rooting out of the programming error requires some extensive rewrites to the operational code.
Yeah.
You know.
Identify the bugs and then...
Right, or if you want to use the surgery metaphor, which is the medical metaphor, you know, that there's a growth in us that requires some really extensive surgery, you know, and that's what the wrath is about. It's about rooting out that, you know, cancerous growth in us so that we may be something new.
It's the scalpel.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're just about out of time. So I want to wrap with then the practical question.
Yeah.
Given that, should at least anyone in the Abrahamic tradition, you know, Jews, Christians, Muslims, should any of us then be proponents of a punitive criminal justice system? Or should we be pushing for a reformative system? If we're to live the theology.
Yeah. I mean, I think reformative is better, but we often live in getting back to the messiness of the world, it's messy and sometimes you're left with no good options. You know, sometimes you're left with punitive as the only option we in our human failings have? You know, can you reform? We watched a Ted Bundy documentary. You know, is there a possible way to reform?
Because his programming is so ingrained.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, and there are times when I think reform is wonderful and it's good and we should work toward it, but we need to remember we're not saviors, right? And so we exist in a world where punishment like that exists to restrain evil, you know, not to wholly cure it, because we don't have any ability to wholly cure it ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? Does that
So
make
it's not about the punishment per se, it's about restraining.
Right. It's about we got to restrain evil in some way so that the innocent may be protected, you know. And sometimes the best way to do that is we got to be punitive, you know. But that's its function, not, I wish it were all restoration and we were capable of full restoration, but until Christ comes again in beauty and power to share the great and promised feast, you know.
Ain't happening.
Right. Well, there are some things we can't reform, you know. So.
On that somewhat darker than usual note.
Well, Jesus is coming back. Yeah. It's cloudy. We might see him.
I don't know. Not a lot of clouds today, so
Not a lot of
this
clouds
may not
today,
be the day.
but one or two. So it might be the day.
It's coming. It's on a motorbike version.
Yeah, right. It doesn't say how many. It just
says a cloud.
right. You know, we got one. There's a shot. So
Cool.
yeah.
Well, thank you. Welcome back.
Yep.
And
Thank you.
hope your time away at least was good.
Yep. It was.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.